This video was brought to you by the following patrons: Adam DeHarp, Ako Comics, Architect 10, Blacklist OG, Carlos, Qua, Ferris, Jeremy Vasquez, Jonathan Sandoval, Kylie Denton, Legendary Boss Hunter, Liam Kessler, Regent Rapton, Rogue Rugger, Shawnee P, Some Guy Named Bob, Sodasan0424, Sadarin23, and Zach Reed. If you like this video and want to see more, please support us on Patreon. You get access to this video, many like it, for only as little as $1 a month. Thank you for your support. Attention all masters, please pay attention to the following information. This isn't going to be your usual wanted, but that's not important. What is important is that soon enough in Fate Grand Order we are going to be getting one quite lovely, quite well endowed, and quite interesting servant from the Heian period of Japan named Murasaki Shikibu. She's a classic author turned arts caster with a few tricks up her sleeves, and this rabbit's here to tell you all about her. First off, we'll talk about her history, and then her stats, mechanics, and niches in Fate Grand Order. Now, when talking about Murasaki Shikibu, a few things come to mind. The first being The Tale of Genji, a novel series depicting the life of one Prince Genji, which has become to be known as a literary classic. The second is The Diary of Murasaki Shikibu, which is quite literally the diary Murasaki Shikibu kept for several years while living at court in Heian-kyo, aka Kyoto, aka the capital of medieval Japan. This diary has been one of the keys in getting to know the court lifestyle of the Heian period. So, to dive right in, let us rewind a bit to 1970s Japan, the height of Japan's golden age, the Heian period. During these times, Japan was making great cultural strides, distinguishing themselves more and more from the Chinese with progress in the arts and sciences. Court life reflected this the most, with pursuits such hobbies as poetry, calligraphy, and painting. They were seen as quite the noble pursuits, and boy howdy did nobles love doing them. In fact, they did it so much that they usually left the governing to other lesser nobles and focused on being as pretty as cultured as one could be. Enter the scene one Fujiwara no Tomotoki, a noble fallen from grace and status, but whose family is well known and influential among the literaries of the courts. He held a minor post in Heian-kyo, the capital, along with his wife. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. One of these girls would go on to become Murasaki Shikibu. No, she was not born with that name. According to Fate materials and some translations, her name was Karuko, but according to other research, it may have also been Takako. This rabbit only shrugs in moon language. Regardless, this young girl grew up in her father's household, which was strange as usually children were raised in their mother's household in a separate location. But it was believed that Murasaki's mother died early, so she stayed with her father in the capital. It wasn't long before the young girl's talents began to blossom though. In those days, Japanese was still growing as a written language, with Chinese being still used for official documents and message. Thus, it was only the men who were to learn it, as women were kept from such matters. Murasaki, though, would sit and listen in on her brother's lessons and displayed quite the aptitude for written language. She would go on in her writings that her father would often exclaim, "Just my luck that you were not born a man." Her father did not deter her from learning though, and gave her a thorough education in literature and the arts. She grew up loving the tale of the bamboo cutter and the tales of Issei, both already classics in her time. Her education did not make her many friends though, and Murasaki became a loner with a somewhat difficult personality. Flash forward to 998. Murasaki, now a young woman, had traveled with her father to his new government post in Echizen, but quickly returned to Kyoto to be married to Fujiwara no Nobutaka, her second cousin and friend of the family. Nobutake was in his 40s, making him almost twice Murasaki's age, and had an unknown number of wives and households. He also had a post in the Ministry of Ceremonies. He held the title of Shikibu, hint hint, and was well known and liked at court. Being wealthy and a great dancer probably had something to do with it too. There's not much known about their married life. Some accounts say it was happy, others saying Murasaki resented the man. Regardless, they had a daughter the next year, and 2 years after that, Nobutaka kicked the bucket during a cholera outbreak. Things really sucked around those times. So now Murasaki is a rich noble widow and has plenty of time to do whatever. So what does she do? Retreat to Ishiyama-dera, a temple at Lake Biwa. Enjoy such activities as reading, grieving, and staring at the moon, leaving the care of her daughter to her many servants, and generally not dealing with anyone. This is where Murasaki reportedly started writing the tale of Genji. Whether it was on her own or by commission, no one can agree on. One of the most famous scenes, though, from this period is that she would stare at the moon for inspiration, and this imagery inspired many artists over the centuries. Also, real talk, if you want a Murasaki power spot, Ishiyama-dera is the place to be. They have a Genji room with a life-size statue of Murasaki in it. If you want an alternative, Harvard University contains a complete copy of the Tale of Genji dating back to the late 1500s. Flashback to Heian-kyo for a hot minute. Power changes hands with Fujiwara no Michinaga gaining power, becoming regent in all but name, and through a lot of political maneuvering placed his daughter Soshi as the second empress to Emperor Ichijo in an unprecedented power move. Listen, I could go on and on about the power struggles in the court, but it's a bit too wild to get into fully, so I'll just explain the bits as needed. Pretty much before, there could only be one empress, but what Michinaga did was make a second empress title, Chugu, to go next to the first empress, Kogo, or lustrous heir bearer. Seeing a name like that really sets in what Japanese men thought of the women back in those days. So enter the second empress Soshi, an upstart, a new face on the block and needing to look good for her daddy, so he could in turn look like the best uncle to the emperor. Wait, what? Reminder that in those times, marriage within the nobility's family was a way to concentrate power and influence. Keeps influence within the family. Nothing weird here at all. Anyways, the first empress Teishi has been making moves herself and gathered status in the form of a cultural salon where noble ladies will lounge around, be pretty, have love affairs, and perform the arts such as music, poetry, and liturgy, all the while hanging out with drunk guys. The more prestigious and decadent your salon was, the cooler your faction was. Empress Teteshi's salon had one lady-in-waiting named Sei Shonagon, an up-and-coming author famous for The Pillow Book, and all-around party girl. Don't worry, I'll talk about her all next year. So anyway, Michinaga sees her and is pretty much all like, oh no, she's cool, and goes off to find a super cool lady-in-waiting artist to place at his daughter's side. Re-enter one Murasaki Shikibu. Having started the tale of Genji, she was the perfect one to place at Empress Soshi's side to counter Sei Shonagon. Now there are theories that Fujiwara no Michinaga pursued Murasaki romantically, but there's also evidence that she spurred his advances. Regardless, Michinaga got Murasaki in through the back channels, making all the nobles collectively gasp again, and placed her at Soshi's side as a companion tutor. In her capacity as a tutor, Murasaki was said to have a strong influence on the Empress and in her studies, going so far as to teach her Chinese in secret. It didn't stay a secret for long, as Empress Soshi would display Chinese characters upon screens and show them proudly. This was frowned upon by the men, who were at the time still of the mindset that Chinese was a man's language. This led to a bit of tension for Murasaki and Soshi's salon, which led to Murasaki being dubbed the Lady of the Chronicles, after the Chronicles of Japan, from an incident where chapters of the tale of Genji were read aloud for the emperor and his court, and it was remarked that whoever wrote it must have a high level of education. It was something that came to this sin incident that coined the name Murasaki for the author. One noble referred to her as such from a character in the tale of Genji, and what would assume to be a compliment, and in the way of things in those days, names stick. By the way, Murasaki translates to the wisteria, a vine growing purple flower. This is why you'll often see Murasaki depicted in shades of purple. Also, that same character has been believed to be Murasaki's self-insert, but nothing has actually been confirmed. This, among other things, is what led many to believe that Murasaki Shikibu had a boring, if not unhappy, court life. She did not care for the drunken revelries, poetry contests, or love affairs. So she wrote and kept to herself for the most part, and so her life continued. Let's talk about her works for a bit. Most famous could be said to be The Tale of Genji, the three-part novel that spanned over 1,100 pages and 54 chapters that took over a decade to write and the patronage of Michinaga to complete. It was considered a great work in its time and went on to become a classic fairly quickly, even becoming required reading for poets not long after. The story follows one Hikaru Genji, aka Shining Prince, through his lives and romances. Interesting tidbit though, it's been debated on whether or not Murasaki actually wrote the entire thing. Her daughter may have written the second half. This, like many other things in Murasaki history, is shrouded in mystery. The obvious literary significance of the Tales of Genji aside, it also pushed forward the Japanese written language, the kana, into more prominence as Murasaki only wrote it in Japanese. This, along with other works of other authors, helped establish Japanese as a written language. This is almost a straight comparison to how Dante pursed modern Italian over Latin with his wildly popular and classic piece of work, The Divine Comedy. That is a topic for another time though. Another notable work of Murasaki's was the diary she kept at court for 2 years. While this isn't a significant work of the time, this is one of the works that helped describe the court life at the time, because records were sparse. Murasaki was often meticulous in her diary, sometimes going on in great details on events transpiring there, as well as her thoughts on them. Her diaries and other like it have proved indispensable for understanding Heian culture. And finally, while it doesn't have the modern-day prestige like her other works, Murasaki did have a collection of 128 poems known as the Poetic Memoirs, which she wrote throughout her life. While there are many other things to note of Murasaki's life and legacy, as in a relationship with Michinaga and other rival authors, her daughter Kataiko, I shall handwave them, as while they're interesting aspects to Murasaki's life, they don't really tell you much about Murasaki herself. I shall do the same for the tale of Genji, in which it had... While there are many things to note of Murasaki's life and legacy, as in a relationship with Michinaga and rival authors, her daughter Kataiko, I shall handwave them, because while they are interesting aspects to Murasaki's life, they don't really tell you much about Murasaki herself. I shall do the same for the tale of Genji and the effect it had on Japanese culture, such as Genji rooms and Genji-e, which are Genji-inspired arts and craft. Instead, we move on to the final piece in the year 1011, the year Emperor Ichijo died. Empress Soshi retired to a manor at Lake Biwa, and Murasaki went with her, once again finding solace in the temple of Ishiyama-dera. From then on, not much is heard from the prestigious author. It is assumed that Murasaki stayed there until her death. An exact date is unknown, but historians mostly agree that it was in the year 1014, but there may have been some details that put it as late as 1025. Regardless, going by the former figure, Murasaki lived until her early 40s before passing, and thus she was recorded. Before we do get into her fate-related stats, I do want to shout out that Murasaki is from a particular era of the Heian period. She was alive at the same time as Abe no Senmei and Minamoto no Raiko. This puts her in the same timeline as Kentoki, Shuten, Suna, Ibaraki, and Ashiya Domen. A couple of those who are also part of the right to gang design. I will also note that technically Tamamo no Mai existed at the same time, at least according to the Nasoverse. This may be one of the reasons Murasaki has an appearance in Lost Point 5.5 and got a raid up around the same time. Also, if you're looking for more Murasaki in your life, she will get a swimsuit rider version for Summer 5, Summer Servant Camp. Now that she resides in the Throne of Heroes, let us talk about her capabilities. Murasaki Shikibu is an SSR caster, and a limited one at that. Without grails, her level caps at 90 with a stats of attack 11,374 and health at 12,833, making her second among all casters for attack and 13th for health. If you were to grail Murasaki to 100, her attack reaches 12,451 and her health 14,059, still leaving her second for attack but dropping her to 22nd for health. To get her to level 90 though, you're gonna need about 12,148,500 experience, and without great or super success, you're gonna need about 375 4-star caster embers and 4,450,250 QP. Thankfully, her ascension mats are not too difficult, as you'll only need 17 caster pieces, 17 caster monuments, 8 forbidden pages, 6 black tallow, 9 primordial lanagos, and 5 scares of wisdom. Add 4.4 million QP to that and you are set. Grailing her to 100 though will require 5 grails and 55 million QP, not to mention another 252 4-star caster embers and 6,138,720 QP. Let's move on to skills. Her first is Song of the Poet A, referencing how poetry was read and how Murasaki's poem is included in some collections. It gives a 20-30% debuff to enemy defense and at the same time a damage buff against demonic enemies. Its cooldown at level 10 is 6 turns. Following that, at her first ascension, you get Witchcraft Lyric D+, most likely referencing from her FGO materials that Murasaki studied on Mudo. Most interesting enough, under Abe no Senmei, one of the most prestigious mages of the time. Anyways, it has a 60-80% chance to NP seal one enemy for 1 turn, as well as charging her MP gauge from 20 to 30%. Finally, it boosts Murasaki's MP damage from 10 to 20%. At level 10, it has a 6-turn cooldown. And finally, at her third ascension, Murasaki gains Diary of Murasaki Shikibu B, a skill reflecting her famous diary. It is interesting to note that this is actually another one of Murasaki's noble phantasm. It's a perfect record of all that she has witnessed and allows her to edit out things she doesn't like. It has a 500 to 1000 damage cut, 1-time debuff immunity, and 1-time buff removal resistance plus 100%. At level 10, this has a cooldown of 5 turns. Leveling these skills to 10 will be no easy task though. To level each skill to 10, you're going to need 17 shining blue caster gems, 17 magic red caster gems, 17 secret gold caster gems, 9 black tallow, 15 forbidden pages, 24 soundless bells, 10 Tsukumo Miros, and 1 crystallized lore. Once you've thrown that all into a bowl, cover all of these ingredients with 51 million QP and you'll have one skill at level 10. Do that 3 times. I should note that the mirrors are going to be a new item, so don't expect to have a lot of them. I do believe it will be impossible for anyone to 10-10-10 Murasaki right out of the gate. Murasaki only has 2 passives though. Territory Creation C for a 7% art boost, as well as Item Creation C Plus for a 7% increased debuff success chance. Nothing particularly strong or fancy, but meshes well with the rest of her kit. Now, before we get into her noble phantasm, gonna take a moment to talk about her command deck. It's Quick, Arts, Buster. But all her cards are 4 hits, with the exception being her extra attack, which is 5. Her MP gain on attack is 0.45%, which isn't the greatest, but it's far from the worst. While she cannot form an arch chain on her own, getting said arch chains with another servant will have good to great gains that will lead up into her MP. Her crit, star gain, and weight are standard for casters, so don't expect anything amazing there. Murasaki's Noble Phantasm is an interesting one under the hood. It is the Tale of Genji, Chapter 9, The Monster, a poem of resentment and sorrow turned into a devastating curse. It's a poetry type, 6 hits, arts, AoE, damage Noble Phantasm that deals extra damage to demons and inflicts a buff block on all enemies for 1 turn. Its base damage scales from 400 to 600% at an MP2, the biggest leap, and from there goes to 675, 712.5, and capping at 750% at MP5. The effects based on its overcharge is a damage modifier against demonic enemies, starting at 150% at 100 and 200% at 500% overcharge. Looking at all this, one might think Murasaki is all over the place, but Murasaki's actually falling into a particular niche here. She's an art support caster centered around frustrating enemy skills and slapping around demons real hard. You can use her first skill to just make the party that much better at hitting things, demons in particular, and lets her own MP smack that much harder. Before that though, you pop her second skill for that extra oomph, and if timed right can delay an enemy MP at a crucial moment. For example, if you know there might break bar into a full charge MP. Her third skill centers around keeping enemies from being able to mess around with your team. With damage cut, debuff immunity, and buff removal resistance, you can be secure in knowing that enemies will have that much harder a time of messing with you. You should be able to fire off her MP on a fairly regular basis, so consistently laying down buff block will keep enemies from stacking up too much. No servant exists in the vacuums though, and Murasaki particularly shines with other archetype servants of any and all classes. In particular though, Caster Shuten, who also has MP Sil on a skill and does extra damage against demonic enemies, is a shoo-in. They will be your go-to combo for against most demonic enemies. Craft essences that work well with Murasaki are fairly easy. First off, K-scopes and imaginary rounds will let her MP turn around with her MP battery skill. MP battery CEs like Peerless Puppeteer, Dive in the Blue, and Painting Blue will work if you have another servant or support that can give team MP battery. Otherwise, focus on art spots or just starting/generating MP. For her availability though, Murasaki is a bit rare. Aside from the lucky bag, she only shows up on raid up in 3 banners. For North America, she'll be debuting in the Valentine's Voice and Letter Collection Murasaki Shikibu and the 7 Cursed Books. She will return later this year for what will be originally the Kyo-Mab banner for JP, which was late September, but for here in NA will probably be a standalone banner or something rolled into something else, like Thanksgiving or some other campaign. Finally is the 22 million campaign, which only happened late last year, late November 2020 to be exact, so there is a bit of a wait, but the chances aren't extremely rare like some other servants. Alright, to wrap this up, let's talk about Murasaki's charms. First off, her vibes. She's an intellectual that seems moody and antisocial, but is always willing to help a person out, especially with finding a good book to read. 100 out of 100 librarian. Second, I don't know why Raita designed her with Victorian goth aesthetics, but boy howdy do they work. The glasses, the corsets, the parasol, and how her dress spreads out. Mwah, perfect. I don't know what's going on with tiny hair drills, but I love them. Her layered kimono is also a fresh look and displays Murasaki maybe more naturally. 1000 out of 100 goth librarian. Third, also Raita being Raita, did not miss a chance to put the emphasis on Murasaki's assets. Those proportions are inhuman, but I'm not here for realism. I'm here for that big old titty. 10,000 out of 100 big titty goth librarian. Fourth, let's not forget her history either. Murasaki was married and had a daughter. This means she's actually can qualify for MILF and since her husband is dead, a legal widow. I know there are some people who are into that. Lucky's no exception to this. Big titty goth widow MILF librarian. 100,000 out of 100. Fifth, last but not least, she is voiced by Kayano Ai, who makes Murasaki sound cute but polite, light but steady, but most of all, she makes ah wah 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 noises. Adorable big titty goth widow MILF librarian. 1 million out of 100. Yeah, she is the best, and I'm super excited that she'll be available in North America now. I'll be putting my whole soul into these roles, and I hope anyone else rolling for her will be doing so as well. But I've covered everything I've wanted to say here, so yeah, thank you. Glad you listened to the end and hope you've learned something. I'm Lucky, one half of StudiOmega. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you subscribe, don't forget to hit that bell for notifications so you know when things is happening. If you want to support us, please check out our Patreon, and if you want to hang out with us and a bunch of like-minded individuals, please check out our Discord. Those links should be in the description below. Now, if you excuse me, I'm gonna go curl up with a good book. I bet Murasaki likes her men well read.